Okay, thanks for the nice introduction by the organizers. In the next 30 minutes or so, I would kind of take you through the past, present and future of open source. Just a brief about myself. As the organizers mentioned, I have over 27 years. At least half of that my experience now, I have been a follower of open source and a user of open source and a contributor of open source. I started actually contributing to open source, started using it first when the kind of the Linux versions, earlier Linux versions appeared and were available. I contributed to keyboard driver development for Indic languages, Firefox and localization for Telugu, and LibreOffice localization for Telugu as well. And in the last 6 months I have been actually writing a column called localization for the magazine Linux for You. If you have been following some of that, I would love to kind of hear at the end of the session in terms of your feedback. So the agenda is kind of clear cut, right? So we will just look at open source, past, present and future. Ours is a world of computers, and usually there are lots of words and terminology that are there in when we kind of actually introduce and interact with one another. So that way open source actually means many things to many people. So what I thought is I will start with the definition of from Wikipedia, and then actually we will explore the different dynamics of open source as we kind of go through the rest of the presentation. Basically Wikipedia basically calls it a philosophy or a pragmatic methodology that promotes free distribution of and access to the end products, design and development, design and implementation details, so that everybody can actually get the benefit of the source of the open source of whatever the product that is involved. So it really started with software, the open source terminology, because the incremental cost of really sharing the software is close to 0. But then in the last 10 years, the philosophy as such tried to broaden in its fold the various kind of fields that we are usually kind of interact. So it spread to hardware. So people talk of open source hardware. Actually, I don't know whether some of you heard when we talk of open source beverages. Coca-Cola or Pepsi, their beverage or the kind of it is a very well protected trade secret. So nobody knows how to make Coca-Cola, for example. But then some of the people who are actually inspired by this ideology thought, why can't we really have open source cola? So they came up with a kind of a cola recipe, so it will taste as much as good as a kind of a Coca-Cola. Okay, of course the concept of sharing and peer contributions has been is known to us from time immemorial, because we always share cooking recipes from one generation to another generation. Then there is digital content. How many of you have not used Wikipedia? Can I have a show of hands? I guess so. Wikipedia is one of the prime examples of open source content, again contributed by people like you and me. I happen to be currently the president of Wikimedia India chapter. So we are doing a lot of programs to really bring more and more awareness about Wikipedia. How many of you used Wikipedia in your native language? Can I have a show of hands? So I can see that there are only about 25% of the hands going up. So most of you know that Wikipedia is available in English, but not many people know that it is available in Indian languages, and we are trying to do more and more awareness workshops and Wiki Academy, so that even almost all of our countrymen can actually benefit from the knowledge that is there in Wikipedia. I won't kind of go into much detail, but the education space is actually witnessing a real revolution. So earlier, if you want to kind of attend the education from Harvard University, you have to pay a lot of money, or you have to get a scholarship, you have to go to US. But now you must have heard of some of the courses called Coursera or Udacity. So you can just listen to the best professors in the world, no, kind of explain a kind of a concept of any kind of topic that you are actually interested in. So just to summarize, open source is just not software, it is kind of really touching each and every field of our human endeavor. If you have a question, feel free to kind of interrupt me. Of course, I will take questions at the end. So over the next few slides, I will kind of talk about little bit more about open source history. So as you know, computers kind of that started appearing somewhere in 1940s. The integrated circuit, the transistor, and subsequently the integrated circuit was developed in 1950s. And the computers, usually the mainframes, it started with mainframes, appeared, and then minis and personal computers. So when the really computers came on the scene, of course, it is really the software which does the kind of computation, or which is actually provides the kind of output that you need. But the hardware is what was sold. Open software was kind of given free, okay, and many times the source code itself was kind of shared. In the 1980s, when people started interconnecting our computers, or actually people started accessing the computers remotely through telephone lines and so on, BBS, bulletin board systems became very popular. So people can just log into the kind of central computer, exchange messages, read news, a lot of things, and then of course the whole code itself was actually you can download, you can set up your own kind of a BBS if you have a reasonable kind of a computer. 1980s, one more thing happened, that is actually the introduction of IBM PC, which really changed the evolution of the software. Okay, and the good thing is IBM, as you know, is a kind of a vertically integrated company. It makes everything from a small part to a big kind of a computer. So, but it really it really kind of took a different approach towards development of IBM PC. It said it wanted to kind of really leverage and make the PCs available to a larger audience. So it first thing is the BIOS code was actually provided in source, and then the hardware also actually as a revolutionary thing for that time, hardware schematics were kind of made available, which means that anybody can study those things, can actually come up with a better PC, and the result is of course you have a lot of clones. But what it really spawned is the computing was made available to many companies and many end users, and it spawned a lot of innovation. So whatever features that you think of that were available, for example 640 kilobytes of memory, okay, now you see how many gigabytes of memory is available on a typical personal computer. Just a kind of a screen, but you can actually play video, kind of actually exchange, have Skype phone calls. So much of innovation has actually happened, and it touched each one of us across the world. GNU tool suite was kind of actually developed by Richard Stallman. I have next slide, I will kind of talk briefly about that. But one thing that happened in the past was that people realized that there is a lot of time and money is kind of going into the development of software. Software projects are actually delayed. There are a lot of bugs, and so companies have actually started spending a lot of money, and so they wanted to kind of see how do they recover. That is when they said, okay, the software can be protected by a copyright, and so companies started charging money for the kind of software binaries. And of course, if somebody wants source code, they have to pay through the nose. So I will like to kind of take you to the next slide of Richard Stallman's 4 software freedoms. So Dr. Richard Stallman actually kind of rebelled against this idea that the software can be proprietary. He said the software has to be free. So he actually kind of became a proponent of the free software. When whatever he was actually used to do earlier, so he used to kind of take the printer's source code, improve it, add features, and kind of release it back to the community. So that was actually prevented by these vendors. They said no more software will no longer be free. So actually he started this free software movement and actually proposed these kind of 4 software freedoms. it is interesting to kind of look at them briefly, so that we understand, because there are various kind of interpretations of free software, open source, and of course, it will be very nice to have kind of some kind of a benchmark against which we can compare and say, okay, does this software really meet these definitions. The first freedom is of course to run the software for any purpose. Free software or open source lot and proprietary software also kind of give that freedom. So, you can, there are so many things that you can download and run. Then the next is of course study how the program works and adapt it to your needs. Of course, this is only available with most software called free software or open source software. Redistribute copies so that you can help your neighbor, and improve the program and release your improvements to the public. These are actually the characteristics of free software, and it is thanks to the greatness of Richard Stallman that he actually used the kind of copyright law itself to really promote this free software, by basically saying that if you want to use free software, okay, follow this license, GPL license, whatever modifications you do to this, you should actually distribute the source code as well. So, it is called viral license, and that is how the free software caught on. And subsequently in of course, there is a lot of idealism for the movement that Richard Stallman came up with, and of course, he considered the proprietary software to be kind of evil, every software should be free and so on. But then during 90s, actually the Linus started developing the kernel, which we all know now as Linux, and so when the GNU tool suite was kind of developed by the Free Software Foundation and was married with the kernel, so the whole the kind of a desktop software as a kind of a complete thing became available, and people started using the desktop, I mean open source based desktops as an alternative to the predominantly kind of commonly used Windows and Windows software on an Intel platform. Unfortunately, I mean the desktop, I mean the open source never gained traction on the desktop, but parallelly the web server, the Linux as a for server actually gained a lot of traction because of the very high quality Apache and other software that became available. So, in the last 10 years, I mean I can consider the last 10 years as the present phase that we are kind of going through. So, you can see many of the popular software that most of you use, even if you are actually using desktops, I think you can relate to the Firefox, you can LibreOffice or kind of WordPress, Drupal. Of course, the latest in the last 2-3 years, I mean I do hope that some of you are actually using Android based phones. So, what it really kind of made everybody realize is that you can no longer kind of ignore free or open source software. Okay, you have to kind of live with it. So, the coexistence of closed source along with open source is the kind of reality. So, every software firm actually started trying to see how they can get the benefit from open source. IBM, when it decided to kind of shelve its development of its own web server and actually kind of utilize Apache, so actually became the big proponent. In the last few years, you can see that you name any company, you have heard from Oracle, for example, how it has acquired this MySQL, and it is actually offering it as a full-fledged offering along with the other proprietary software. So, even the business models, there has been a lot of change. Okay, so people originally companies thought they can give away 100% of the source code free and really generate revenues from customization, training, and support. So, there is a success story in the sense that Red Hat, which started in '95, actually became a $1 billion company in this particular year. But not many open source vendors were able to really make money out of that kind of a model. The second model that became popular is the dual licensing model. There is a community license and there is a commercial license. You heard of Oracle's executives explaining how they are actually using I mean are supporting the MySQL as a open source product, but again kind of actually making money with a commercial license. That is the next one. The third variance that is kind of the variance that has appeared is that now that people are talking of core as the open source, open core, but then you kind of actually keep pieces of that extensions are the which are actually lot more useful for enterprise customers or for other customers as closed source. So the open source models are also changing a lot, and so as you can actually see from the Android, I think this is a phone that I kind of bought, and it can actually run display Indic languages as well. So 2, 3, 5 years back, who would have imagined that this will become a open source? So how did this happen? So Google actually kind of pioneered this in terms of really developing a open source version of the phone and really making it available to the kind of in the ecosystem. But then it has its own way of how does it get money from the whatever the investment it has put into the open source. Of course, it has its applications which reach everybody because it is offering this to as a free open source platform. Then it can make money from ads and so many other ways. So this actually kind of characterizes. So you can see that even our Linux for You has become open source for you from this month onwards, and you have great big names in proprietary source embracing open source. I would like to kind of mention few trends apart from whatever I have shared. So open source as a kind of as a concept, even proprietary companies actually are also becoming comfortable with. I know of a company called Atlassian which makes excellent collaboration tools called Jira, use it for bug tracking, wiki called Confluence. They started just 4 or 5 years back, and of course they use a lot of open source for developing their own software, but they kept their source closed. But the cost of their cost of development is much less, so they are able to kind of offer their products for a very reduced rates to all their small and medium kind of businesses or enterprise businesses. And not only that, they are a small company, but then how do they really promote their software? Okay, they said, okay, we are a small company, so don't have too much of worry that we are a small company. You buy our products, and then we kind of give you this access to our open source, access to our source for a very nominal cost kind of a thing. So that in case this company goes under, the businesses don't suffer, they can still kind of develop based on the kind of code. Not only that, Microsoft, which is actually and of course Oracle, these are all famous for the kind of a closed source environment. They also are actually being forced to kind of at least share part of their source code for a zero fee. For example, if they want to sell in the Chinese market or any big markets, the big markets can put constraints. For example, there is a lot of code that is in encrypted. So if you are actually relying for your national needs on a kind of a source code from a company, and you don't know what all that code can do, it can maybe pass on some of the information that you are storing secretly to some other location. So how can really companies deal with that? So basically saying, okay, this is the kind of a core piece of code we are ready to share with you, so that you can make sure that our code is kind of safe, it doesn't do any bad things, and then we will kind of be able to serve your business needs. So these are the kind of tremendous changes that are happening in the whole software environment. I will mention about open source hardware. Not many people kind of really thought it will gain market. Okay, originally there were some designs. IBM PC, its design itself was open source. Then actually in 2000 onwards, 2000 time frame, the very precursor to this kind of these smartphones, maybe PDAs and so on, Simputer. Some of you must have heard of the Simputer. So it was based in it is started by a company based in Bangalore called Encore, and they came up with the idea of a free open source license for their hardware. Unfortunately, after some gaining some traction, that product is no longer there in the market, and of course we have these Android and other kind of devices which have which are actually serving the functions that are there served by this computer. So, in the recent few years you can see that Raspberry Pi, okay, it is a $25 product. All of you must have known about Akash tablet. Of course, this is a slightly different product, it does not come with a monitor etc., but it is a great educational product. It is kind of developed by a foundation, and the sales are kind of really thriving. So, for an education purpose, the open source hardware has really opened up. And not only that, there is this nice nice thing that you see at the right side, MakerBot Industries. It is a 3D printer. It is again it has actually come out of a open source movement, and it is the latest craze in the Europe or Western world. So, everybody, I mean, we all kind of acquired our own printers with the desktop publishing revolution and PC revolution. Now, everybody wants to kind of get a a 3D printer, so that some of you have received the Dolphin soft toy or something, maybe you will be able to design your own soft toy and then kind of enjoy. So, I think that is kind of really the trend that is appearing. Open source business models I did mention, and actually these 3D vendors, although they started as open source vendors, they are actually thinking how do they protect, because as you can see, once it is open source, it is easy to kind of really come up with a clone. So, there are clone manufacturers now providing those 3D printers for a very less cost. Now, they are trying to see how do I protect. Again, there they are thinking what is core, what can be actually kind of kept as proprietary. So, it is we are really living in an interesting times. For example, many people question the idea of Google's licensing or development philosophy of Android. Is it really open? Because all through the development, it is just closer to their Google's and maybe their partners. But once it is released, the code is available for other people to kind of improve and so on. So, there is I mean, people are kind of trying to play and come up with different kind of innovations in terms of how do we really get the benefit from the open source. I would like to spend little time on this. So, there is an excellent study done by Oliver and Marcus. It has been published in McKinsey Quarterly in January 2012. They just looked at the example of IBM, how IBM actually made a big shift in the open source world by supporting the open source and really shelving its product and becoming a champion of open source. So, they looked at when IBM did this in 2004 time frame. So, Microsoft and Oracle, these are all the kind of big vendors, but IBM actually was able to really align itself with the open source movement and really become much more profitable and actually undercut the competitors. So, whether it is Sun, I think, which is no longer existing and it is acquired by Oracle. So, these two gentlemen from university in Europe, they have actually done an analysis of the different industries and how they will be impacted by the open source. So, I know it is difficult to read, I will just kind of mention couple of highlights. So, they looked at for example, building construction cranes. Okay. There is a lot of software that goes into that, okay, how that industry will be affected. And for example, pharmaceuticals, okay, how does that industry get affected? Or car, most of us kind of use cars, how does it become affected because of the increasing availability of open source and increasing spread of open source. So, they looked at what is the kind of strength of the proprietary components in a particular industry, how fast is open source spreading, and also what is the kind of complexity because of which some of the open source may actually infringe on patents, like it happened when IBM kind of looked at the open source scene. So, they had kind of done this survey and then find that even for a kind of a thing as a crane, there is so much of software that is going in, so many kind of people are actually contributing to open source, and there is a very high risk that the companies which are actually in the proprietary world, either as a specialized players or an integrated players, they can no longer ignore open source, open innovation. In the case of pharmaceuticals, for example, there is a industry consortia have come together. So, they are actually kind of sharing lot of basic research. It benefits everybody through open source, but then they are still trying to protect their proprietary kind of patents and so on by keeping some of that technology to themselves, or by actually deriving by actually having derivative kind of applications themselves. Motor cars, I was actually surprised by this study when they said there is a open car design. So, I talked about the 3D printers and so on, you can build anything. So, there is a open car design that you can actually download, and of course, if you have the necessary manufacturing space, you can actually build it. Okay. Maybe you can build a model car now with the 3D printers, but for a market requirement in Brazil, I heard that a company actually invited ideas from the its consumers and they actually designed a car. So, whichever industry you are working in, I think these are some things that that you need to kind of watch out for, and because it is really going to change information that I came across. For example, open source becomes the dominant platform driven by the smartphones and tablets. Maybe the desktops, the proprietary vendors ruled the desktop, but maybe in 3 years time frame, 3 to 5 years time frame, I think you will kind of see the prevalence of Android and usage on smartphones and tablets. Open source hardware we talked about. So, I think maybe in another 3 to 5 years time frame, I do hope that some of you will also be able to kind of own some 3D printers and come up with some new designs, or toys or jewelry or whatever. So, another thing that is kind of interesting is actually industry consortia. I was just listening in the other day in the our open source conference, and today there is a lot of sessions about it. It is called OpenStack. So, so many kind of industries have come together and actually building it as it is giving a tough competition to the closed source cloud players in the cloud computing world. So, I have been also on the standards group to develop cloud standards for a while as part of IEEE. I can see that none of the industry players are actually able to ignore, and they are actually coming together and either developing their products conforming to the kind of APIs, or actually kind of really pushing open source based products as a real viable alternative to some of the other products from competitors. So, the whole ecosystem actually is kind of broadening, and innovative business models are kind of happening. So, for example, how many of you, I mean, you might have actually had a problem with your Microsoft Office or a LibreOffice, but you would not really have enter into a kind of a contract to kind of find a fix for the problem that you are having. Of course, because they are not really mission critical.Maybe if it has crashed, maybe you can try different way and you can actually kind of get whatever you want to do. But that leads to, I think, like Red Hat has identified its own niche in terms of the enterprise support. The cloud computing, for example, Ubuntu and many other players are actually kind of trying to see how they can actually monetize by using cloud computing. There are so many other innovation that will come up, and I think we live in an exciting times, and I do hope it would be interesting to be a player in whatever way, as a user, as a contributor in this open source ecosystem. These are some of the references that I have used. Wikinomics, I would a book by Don Tapscott and Anthony Williams, a very interesting kind of insight you can get by reading that. And of course, free, another book, how you can really survive if you are in the free world, opensource.com, and then of course some of the other papers from that I mentioned in the in my talk. All these photos that I have used are available from Wikimedia Commons, and of course trademarks belong to the respective organizations. Is there a time for a question? Okay, anybody has any question or comment? Yeah. The question, I think the gentleman's question is about, we have so many distributions of open source now for our computers. So is it possible that some of these will merge, or some of them will become dominant? I think if you kind of look at the
dominance, we can have one conversion where all
okay.
have one unique.
Yeah, there are, I mean, let me kind of address that. So one is open source actually by its philosophy, actually encourages, kind of little bit of a chaotic environment. You want some feature, whatever you are actually using, it doesn't have it, you build it yourself and kind of share it with others. That leads to little bit of fragmentation. But as you can see that in the last few years, for example, Ubuntu has gained a significant market share. So that way I would see that there will be kind of 2-3 players who will become dominant, and maybe some of the other players may be only for some niche applications people may use. That is kind of going to certainly going to happen. But again, of course, fragmentation is always a possibility. Google is kind of trying to control its fragmentation by kind of trying to, yeah. Actually, I mean, we can't really think of just one kind of a thing. There is a certain way that people come together. For example, like standards, there is a kind of a Unix desktop standard and other things, so that applications can run on any platform. The standards will progress, but otherwise there will be certainly 2-3 dominant players, like it happened with Ubuntu. And of course, there are other new vendors who are trying to kind of occupy the position of Ubuntu as well. Actually, it is the tension that is there in the ecosystem which actually leads to better innovation. For example, I can remember how difficult it is to kind of install some software when I was in the earliest Red Hat Linux or Fedora world. With Ubuntu, when I switched to Ubuntu, I found that just click on that and I am comfortable. So it is a reality that we have to live with, but certainly there will be 2-3 players who will become dominant. Any other questions? Here is the one gentleman.
See, is it good for open source, or see, Oracle has taken out MySQL.
Yes.
See, even though it is a open source, it is becoming like we need to pay some amount or something to get some of the features.
Yes.
How are you seeing this, or whether is it correct or?
Yeah, interesting question. As I mentioned that the business models on how we can really make money from whatever the open source investments that firms are making, they are really changing. So even before Oracle has acquired, for example, MySQL's business model was to offer a community edition and also a kind of an enterprise version, and basically get money out of the enterprise version, because enterprise users really demand a lot more performance and features than a kind of a typical experimenter or hacker. So I see that as a good, because so previously, I mean, these two groups never used to talk together. So we are actually kind of talking. So if you are interested in open source, actually you can earn money by kind of being employed by big companies also, which was not the case. Maybe earlier, only professors and students used to kind of spare their time and develop. I really see as a good. So, but I think increasingly we will be actually able to kind of utilize more and more open source, but there will be still some niche areas that the vendors will tap into it. I see that as a positive development.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any more questions?
Sun Microsystems, okay.
Yes.
So, what do you think? Is it alarming thing for open source world? Today companies are acquiring or they are releasing a lot of open source code in
Yes.
One is a proprietary version, one is the open source version. But it can lead up to a monopoly later on by the vendors.
Yes.
And similarly, in the case of Java, then every developer who works in Java is really scared when that
Yeah.
case was going on.
Yeah.
So what do you think? That is it alarming thing, or still they can sustain with the open source world?
Okay, very interesting. I am sorry I didn't bring out that, and I am happy that you brought out that element of licensing, how it is really getting impacted as the proprietary vendors actually acquire some of the open source code base. So actually, what I think is the licensing as a philosophy will evolve, so that maybe whatever kind of the concerns that the users are having because of these proprietary companies acquiring, I think that will kind of go away by actually defining better licensing terms, so that the product will be kind of continue to be available for community and it would be usable. There are another ways. I think, for example, I would like to kind of quote the example of what happened. For example, Oracle has acquired Sun, which actually kind of supported the Open Office, which supported Java. So your question was about Java, but I just want to kind of illustrate about the Open Office. For example, it has become now LibreOffice. Some of the people from the open source world became concerned, that how it will treat, Oracle will treat this Open Office. So they decided to fork it themselves. Now in the last 1 year, it has become a full-fledged product, and then it is being used by more and more people. So that is one kind of a challenge or a reaction that from the community, okay, that will try to balance whatever the interests of the proprietary vendors may have to kind of make money. The second thing is, I think from a Java example, I find that maybe the licenses that we had were not so rigorous and were kind of susceptible for interpretation and for maybe by the vendors. I think the licensing terminology for any new products, I think would evolve so that the proprietary, there will be space for proprietary vendors to make the money, but not at the cost of the basic usage and the community needs.